Joy Vernon was all alone in her hospital room. She was alone with her fears, alone with her pain, and alone with her memory of the SUV rolling over her body. See, her vacation became a tragedy when her car slipped out of gear and it began to roll down a steep Colorado mountain ravine with her 3 children still strapped inside the vehicle. She and her parents had been looking at a cabin that her parents were considering buying, and when she saw the vehicle moving, she immediately ran to the front of the vehicle, fearing that she wouldn't have time to jump inside the driver's side door to stop the vehicle. She literally ran in front of the vehicle and tried to stop it there. She slowed it down enough that her father was able to get in from the passenger seat and hit the brake and bring the car to a stop. Her interference literally saved her children's lives that day. It was in October of 1999, and her children still remember the expression on her face as the car pulled her under. Her back was broken. There was extreme internal damage. She was airlifted to a hospital in Farmington, New Mexico, and her condition was so fragile the doctors had to wait 12 days before they could even perform surgery. She emerged from the surgery with a dangerously high fever. Her medical team struggled to get her fever under control, but they couldn't. For 7 days, her temperature raised, and so did her fears. She was afraid of dying. She was afraid of living as a paralytic. The physicians tried to comfort her, but there was no comfort to be found. Joy pleaded with her mom for help. Her mother, who had maintained a bedside vigil, stepped out to call friends for prayer. She said, "I'll be back soon." Joy was all alone. But not for too long. For a man opened the door and walked into her room. She didn't recognize the man. All her nurses, per her request, were females. And if the man was a doctor, he wasn't one of hers. She had never seen him before. He had a striking appearance, tall, dressed in white. He had high cheekbones, silver white hair that was parted in the middle and descending down his back in a ponytail. And his eyes? 14 years later, Joy breaks out in a smile when she remembers his eyes. Crystal blue and bright. She said, "I've never seen such beautiful eyes before." The visitor stepped to the end of her bed, picked up her chart, flipped through it, casually looking at the pages, but Joy had this impression that he wasn't really reading what was written there. And after a few moments, he spoke to her with a soothing voice and said, "Joy, you're going to be all right. You will get through this." He looked at her, and then just as quickly as he had entered, he left the room. Joy said, "I instantly believed him. Had it been a doctor or a nurse or a family member saying those words, I probably would have still doubted. But when this stranger spoke, there was a knowing in my inner person that he knew me, and I believed him that I was going to be okay." When her mother re-entered the room a few moments later, Joy immediately told her about the man. She said, "Mom, he said I'm going to be fine." Joy's mom ran out into the hall to find the visitor, but saw no one matching his description. She described him to the staff. They knew nothing of such a man. They searched the hospital. They could not find him. Joy knows why. She believes that visitor was heaven sent that day. Just for her. She treasures the words that he spoke because the years have brought pain, difficulty, and life in a wheelchair. But she often returns to the memory of this blue-eyed guest for strength. You're going to be all right. You will get through this. And she has. Who was that visitor? Where did he come from? Did God send an emissary to give Joy hope that day? Well, Joshua could weigh in on this discussion, because he has a story that closely parallels Joy's. A divine encounter with during a dark and difficult time. He wasn't alone in a hospital, but Joshua was alone with the daunting challenge. Joshua was near Jericho. David had his Goliath. Elijah had his Jezebel. John had the Roman Empire. And Joshua had the people of this fortified city. It towered on the plains like a titan. Successive walls encircled the stone houses. The outer wall was 7 feet thick and 16 feet high. And on top of this wall, a second wall had been built that was 8 feet tall. A citadel guarded the north end. A thick forest of palm trees, 8 miles long and 3 miles wide, stood as a barrier east of the city. Steep hills protected the western wall. High walls and protected sides. Joshua and his soldiers had never faced a challenge like this. They had fought all of their battles up to this point on their turf, in the open plains, out in the wilderness. Never had they encountered a fortified city before. Maybe you haven't either. Maybe you're facing a challenge today unlike any that you have ever faced in your life before. And it looms on the horizon like an angry Jericho, imposing and strong. And it consumes your thought, and it saps your strength, and it wakes you up and keeps you awake at night. It's an ancient, thick-walled, and impenetrable city or difficulty, the biggest challenge perhaps that you've ever faced in your life. It sits between you and your promised land life. And like Joshua, you can see it. It's imposing, it's intimidating. And like Joshua, you must face it head on. And just like Joshua, you don't have to face it alone. Our text this morning is from Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." And Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. You know, when it comes to heaven to earth communiques, God seems to follow one simple rule. There is no rule. I mean, in the case of Abram, 3 strangers came for dinner. In the story of Moses, it was a blazing bush that left him wide-eyed and barefoot. Remember Balaam? It was a talking donkey that got his attention. At the tomb of Jesus, it was a blazing angel that guarded the empty tomb. The Bible is famous for surprise encounters, yet no visit is more mysterious than this one. One man with an upraised sword and a confident air about him. Who was he? Well, let's eliminate some of the options, shall we? He wasn't an apparition. Nothing in the language leads us to conclude that this person was anything other than flesh and bone. He had muscles where he held a sword in his hand. He had vocal cords that created a voice that was able to communicate with Joshua. He wasn't a vision, he wasn't a spirit, he wasn't a ghost, he wasn't a figment of Joshua's imagination, but neither was he an angel. How do we know this? I mean, angels have swords, don't they? Sometimes. Angels can take fleshly form. Angels can communicate. Angels have courage and can defy enemies. But here's the difference. Angels do not accept worship. When the Apostle John attempted to worship an angel in Revelation 19, he was immediately rebuked, and the angel said, "See that you do not do that. I am your fellow servant and of your brethren who have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God alone." Had this person been an angel, he would have refused Joshua's worship. But this visitor accepted it and actually encouraged that worship. So was this guest merely a human being? Just some strong, imposing figure? Like a king? Well, if he was, he sure had Joshua hoodwinked, for Joshua not only fell at the person's feet out of respect, he also removed his sandals out of a sign that he was in the presence of something holy. So this guest was no mere mortal. He wasn't an angel. He wasn't an apparition. Wasn't a man, so at least one option. This was God incarnate. God in the flesh. It was Jesus Christ. What Jesus did in Bethlehem for us, he did near Jericho for Joshua. He became flesh and paid his servant to visit it. The commander spoke to his commander. Now, do you find that a little bit hard to imagine? Hard to believe even? Jesus BC? Is it so difficult to imagine Jesus as an acting being before his birth on earth? If so, let me challenge you to widen your imagination. Remember, Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. 1 Peter 1:20. He was chosen before the creation of the world. The normal restrictions of time and space do not apply to him as they do to us. We would be wrong to limit his corporal ministry to 33 years in Palestine. Long before Jesus ate with Zacchaeus in Jericho, I believe that he shared a moment with Joshua near Jericho. And what a moment it was. I am the commander of the army of the Lord. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The human eye that night saw only two armies, the Canaanites and the Israelites. But actually there was a third army present, the Lord's army, God's angels. This is the heavenly host referred to in Psalm 103, verses 20 and 21, where it says, "Bless the Lord, you mighty angels of his who carry out his orders, listening for each of his commands. Yes, bless the Lord, you armies of his angels who serve him constantly." Dismiss any notion that you may have of angels with chiffon wings and rosy cheeks. God's angels were strong enough to close the mouths of lions for Daniel. According to the book of Revelation, it will take only one angel to bind Satan and to cast him into a bottomless pit. If just one angel can dispense with the devil, imagine what thousands of angels can do. This many exist. Hebrews 12:22 refers to thousands of angels in joyful assembly. When John was given a glimpse into the heavens in Revelation 5, he saw too many angels to count. He described them as the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands of these created beings. When God opened the eyes of Elisha's servant, the young man saw that the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 6. Angels are ministering spirits sent forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation. That's Hebrews 1:14. Their presence is a promised land perk. All God's children can be sure of God's angels. They are mighty in power, they are many in number, and Jesus is the commander of them all. The message to Joshua is unmistakable. Jericho may have its walls, but Joshua, you have so much more. You have God, and he is with you. Isn't that the word that Joshua needed the most at that moment? A reminder of God's mighty presence. But isn't that what we need the most today? We need to know that God is near, that we are never alone. In our darkest hour, in our deepest questions, the Lord of hosts never leaves us. "I will never leave you, nor forsake you," said the Lord. You need to know that your Father is here, that he is your commander, that he commands his heavenly hosts. You will never face a Jericho alone. That's the promise that God gave Joy in a hospital in New Mexico. It was the same promise that Joshua received near Jericho. And it's the same promise He gives to each one of you today. He is with you. He is still the commander of angel armies. Ephesians 1:22 in the Message paraphrase says, He is in charge of it all. He has the final word on everything. Hebrews 1:3, He sustains everything by the mighty power of His command. All authority has been given to Him. He needs only to lift a finger, and thousands upon thousands of mighty angels will respond to His call. His presence is a part of your inheritance. For Psalm 16:5 says, O Lord, You are the portion of my inheritance and my cup. He will come to you in your darkest hour of need. Will it be in the form of a hospital companion? Or as the holy commander of the armies of angels? Maybe. Or maybe He will come to you through a word of Scripture in the darkness of the night. Maybe it will be through the kindness of a friend. I mean, He might even speak to you through a message like this one. But this much is certain. Mark my words. God comes to His people. The commander of the armies of heaven is here among us. Psalm 46, verse 7. You are no exception to that promise. His love includes all people. Isn't that the point of this curious dialogue between Joshua and Jesus? Are you for us? Or are you for our enemies? Neither. I was puzzled when I first read that. But then I realized God doesn't take sides. He is never against His children. Never. Even the evil Canaanites, who had long ago turned to worshiping idols, they were still candidates for His mercy. If Jericho had turned and repented, God would have received them and welcomed them just like He did Rahab. He is for His children, all of them. And He is for you. Romans 8:31, if God is for us, who can be against us? Are you facing a Jericho-level challenge this morning? Do you face walls that seem too high to breach and too thick to crack? Perhaps it's a diagnosis, a difficulty, or a defeat that keeps you from entering your promised land. If so, do what Joshua did. What did Joshua do? Before that, he lifted his eyes and looked. And behold, a man stood opposite him. You see, it was after Joshua lifted his eyes that he saw Jesus. As long as our eyes are just on our Jericho, as long as they're on the diagnosis, whatever the obstacle is in front of us, we won't see Jesus. We must look up. I love what the psalmist said in Psalm 121. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heavens and earth. In late January 1956, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. received a threatening phone call at his house. It was not the first foreboding message that he had received, mind you. But on this night, as his children and his wife lay sleeping, the weight of the civil rights movement was too heavy. He decided that the risk was too great. He began to map out an exit strategy. At midnight, he bowed over the kitchen table and he began to pray, God, I'm afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I have come to the point where I can't face it alone. King would later describe what happened next with these words. He said, I experienced the presence of the divine as I had never experienced Him before. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying to me, stand up for righteousness. Stand up for truth, and God will be at your side forever. When facing a daunting challenge, King shifted his focus and turned his eyes toward God. So did Paul and Silas. Remember when they got thrown in the Philippian jail? The jailer locked them in the innermost prison and fastened their feet in stocks. They had no recourse, no means of escape, but rather than look at their shackles and their chains, they looked to God. It says in Acts 16:25, at midnight, I love this, at midnight, feet in stocks, in chains, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Probably thinking, shut up, I'm trying to sleep. But it was midnight. They were in the deepest hole of the jail. The doors were locked. The guards were on duty. And yet Paul and Silas were singing and praying. And like Joshua, they looked to God for help. And like Joshua, they received it dramatically. Verse 26, suddenly there was a great earthquake so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were open and everyone's chains were loosed. Help came after they lifted their eyes. After they shifted their focus from the circumstances to God Himself. Christian recording artist Tammy Trent made the same discovery. Several years ago, she went to Jamaica with her husband, kind of an 11th wedding anniversary present, before beginning a missions work camp experience there. They were enjoying some wonderful island time, and as they were leaving the area, Tammy's husband decided to stop off and check out the Blue Lagoon, a favorite dive spot on the island. He suited up, wetsuit, dive mask, fins, and an underwater scooter. His plans were just to swim the lagoon for about 15 minutes, and Tammy waited at the water's edge, eating lunch, watching her husband resurface every few minutes for breath. But then she realized she hadn't seen him for a while. Tammy says, I began to fight back fear when he didn't appear after 30 minutes, and then after 45 minutes. She went for help, and a dive team went to look for Tammy's husband. The search continued until night fell, resuming again the next morning, September 11, 2001. As they searched for her husband, Tammy watched the news as the second plane plowed into the Twin Towers of New York City. Only moments later, a call from the dock confirmed that her husband had been found and that he had drowned in the lagoon. Tammy was in shock. They had been sweethearts since high school. Now she was all alone in a foreign country. She called her parents, and of course, as you know, all flights were grounded. Her parents could not get to her. She could not leave Jamaica. A couple days later, she made her way to Kingston, Jamaica, where she and her husband had planned to begin their missions trip. And there alone in a hotel room, she finally just came undone. She cried out to God, saying, if you are up there anywhere, please send somebody to help me. Somebody to hold me. And just let me know that you care and that you see me. A few minutes later, there was a knock at her hotel door. It was the housekeeper, this older Jamaican woman. She said, I don't mean to bother you, but I couldn't help but hear you crying, and I was trying to get to you. Could I just come in and hold you and pray with you? Tammy broke down in tears, told the woman what had happened. And that kind Jamaican woman put her arms around Tammy and held her close. God used a Jamaican woman, a housekeeper, to comfort His American daughter. Look to Jesus to comfort you. Turn your gaze away from your Jericho and turn your eyes to God. You don't need obsess any longer about Jericho, how big it is, or how impenetrable the walls are. Healing happens as we look to our commander. Lift up your eyes, bow the knees, and worship him. And that's what Joshua did. He fell on his face to the earth and worshiped. This Joshua is the same as, comparable as a 5-star general with 40,000 armed troops that would salute as he passed. I mean, his tent was like the Oval Office out there on the plains. 2 million people looked up to him for decisions. Yet in the presence of God, he fell on his face, removed his sandals, and worshiped God. We are never so strong or so mighty that we do not need to worship God. People who do not worship God have no power greater than themselves to call on. People who do not worship God face their Jerichos all alone. Don't go to your Jericho without first calling on your commander. Let him remind you of his ever-present angels. Let him assure you of his all-encompassing power. He has given you this promise: I will never fail you, I will never abandon you. Hebrews 13:5. Yeah, your Jericho may be imposing. It may be strong. It may look impossible. But Christ is stronger. Let him be your strength. Father, I thank you for this, these few verses of Scripture that remind us that you do care deeply about us. Wow. We don't talk a lot about angels. It seems like one of those things in the world today that some people don't even believe anymore, that that's just fairy tales or whatever. But Father, it is very real. I don't doubt that for a moment. And I thank you that your Son, your only begotten Son, died for each one of us. You put in place a plan of redemption that would allow our sins to be forgiven and to have the assurance of eternal life. But you took it a step farther. It wasn't just enough for us to have our sins forgiven. You said you would send the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, that would literally live within us. God within us. That you would never leave us or forsake us. Father, I know, our prayer concerns were enough to tell us this. I know there are people in this very sanctuary right now who are standing outside the walls of Jericho. And what they're up against seems impossible. But Father, you are there in the darkness of that moment, with sword drawn, ready to do battle on our behalf. Father, help us to keep our eyes fixed on you. May we find strength in you. For it's in Jesus' precious and powerful name. Amen. In this message, I gave you a few examples of what I would call it's like a battle, or verses. Something like David versus Goliath, Elijah versus Jezebel, John against the whole Roman Empire, and Joshua against the city of Jericho. But what is your verses? What is it? If you fill in the blank, you put your name on one side, what is it that you're up against today? What challenge, what enemy are you facing? Do you feel like the underdog in the challenge? Does it seem insurmountable? How are you entering into enemy territory to fight this challenge? And how are your challenges put into perspective when you spend time thinking about the fact that your friend and Savior, Jesus Christ, is the commander of the army of God, and that He's fighting your challenges for you? Thousands of angels, it says in Hebrews, and maybe even tens of thousands of angels according to John in Revelation. They're waiting for the commander's orders. Here's a question for you. I'll ask this for these up here too. This is for anybody to answer. I'm curious. How do you guys envision the army of God? Is it like that Old Testament picture where Elisha prays and the servant's eyes are open and he sees the chariots, the fire surrounding them, the those that are for us are far outnumber those that are against us, he tells his servant. How do you envision the army of God? What would you like to ask Jesus as your commander to have his army do for you today? Is there something holding you back from asking? What do you need to do to let go? So I want to make this room right now a chapel. I want to dedicate the next few moments to worship, as Joshua did. And since any place where God is present is holy ground, I know this is a little unorthodox. If you want to take off your sandals or your shoes, go ahead. This is holy ground. We sang about that earlier, where the Lord is present. It's holy ground. And whenever someone in the Old Testament came to the presence of God, they were commanded to take off their sandals. The place where they were standing is holy. So we're going to sing the song we sang earlier during the offering. God of Angel Armies. I just want us to worship Him together. So please stand with me. And if you want to take off, slip off your shoes, sandals, you are on holy ground.